I didn't mean it. If you come back, I'll never be a pain in the butt again. I promise. Good night.
Platformers have been a staple of gaming almost as long as gaming has been around. Games like Pitfall for the Atari 2600 and the Popeye and Donkey Kong arcade games helped to start up the genre. These games were primitive versions of the platformers we've seen since. I would say that the platformer genre started to get immensely popular during the era of the NES, and there was one game that helped to start it all. That's right, Wally Bear and the No Gang, I mean Super Mario Bros. This game helped to start a revolution in gaming. When Nintendo released this game, it helped gaming to rise from the ashes of a crashed industry and start a new wave of gaming that hasn't stopped since. Platformers were so popular during this time period, and we got so many iconic ones like Mega Man, Castlevania, Sonic, Ninja Gaiden, Kirby, and many more. Platformers have continued to be popular even to this day with games like Super Mario Wonder, Hollow Knight, Cuphead, and Celeste, just to name a few. Platformers are also important to developers. One of the first tutorials many game engines have is to make a platformer game. It helps to teach a lot of great mechanics. I remember when I was a kid, I would play around with Game Maker and try to make platformer games. Then just last year, I attempted to make a platforming game for a game jam, but didn't get too far into it. With 2D platformers being such a huge part of gaming, when 3D consoles started to come out, it was only natural for the games to evolve with them. So we started to get 3D versions of 2D games, with many hits like Super Mario 64 and misses like Mega Man 64. One thing that I, along with many others, have noticed is while 2D platformers are still very popular, 3D platformers seem to all but die out when the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 consoles came out, and have been very quiet since. I want to look back at many big 3D platformers, some that I grew up with and some that I haven't played until now. I want to see if these games still hold up and decide whether 3D platformers should stay in the past or if it's time for them to make a resurgence. I will also go over modern day 3D platformers and a conspiracy about platforming games that I've come up with, so make sure to stick around for that. I will give a note that as I've said before, some of these games I've played and beaten, but a lot of the older ones I have not. I've heard your comments from the last video about me talking about a game I haven't played. It's a fair point, even though I might not completely agree it was necessary for that video. So I decided to spend a good amount of time playing a bunch of classic games that I hadn't played before. I don't have a lot of time right now to beat all of these games, and I don't want this video to take longer to make than necessary. So I'm only going to play enough to be able to form some initial thoughts and opinions of each one. I also want to spend time with more games than each game individually, so I can get a broader scope of what 3D platformers were like. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly thank you all for doubling our 100 subscriber goal. I'm so grateful that now I have over 200 subscribers. Also, thanks for getting the last video to 10k views. It's still crazy to me that the video did so well. Let's try to get this video to 10k too. I want to be able to do this full time if I'm able to, so each one of you helps me out. Let's try to get to 500 subscribers now. If you're not subscribed, please do so you don't miss out on more great videos like this one. Let's start with the Nintendo 64. There were 3D consoles before this, but I want to skip to what many would consider to be the golden age of 3D platformers. Before continuing on, I want to say that I did not grow up with a Nintendo 64, so I'm not very nostalgic for it. I did have a neighbor and some friends who had one, but I haven't played much of the actual N64 system. As far as N64 games go, I have played a lot of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the Zelda Collection CD for GameCube, but other than that, it's one of the Nintendo consoles I'm least familiar with. I want to go over 3 N64 games, starting of course with Mario 64. Super Mario 64 is a game that I've always been meaning to play, but never really got to it. It has a lot of love, and I've seen tons of videos referencing it. So let's take a look at what makes Super Mario 64 so super. The game starts as all great stories do, with Princess Peach saying she baked you a cake and asking you to come over.
Dear Mario, please come to the castle. I have baked a cake for you. Yours truly, Princess Toadstool. Peach.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
The Enrichment Center is committed to the well-being of all participants. Cake and grief counseling will be available at the conclusion of the test. Thank you for helping us help you help us all.
But psych, Bowser has taken over the castle. There's no way I could have seen this coming. Side note, why do so many Mario games start with cake? In the new Super Mario Bros. Game for the Wii, it started with the Koopa kids coming out of a cake. But to be fair, Mario games haven't ever really been about story, so let's focus on other parts of the game. The game plays very well even for now. Mario moves very fluidly and it feels good to control him. The camera controls are a little dated, but that's to be expected. I like that you can do a bunch of different jumps and can dive around. You have an impressive amount of control over Mario for a game this old. It's cool to be able to punch and dive into Goombas and other enemies to defeat them. Too bad you can't do that in the other games. One issue I did have with the controls, which may just be a me thing, is I had difficulty going up to signs and reading them. Mario just seemed to move too much from the slightest touch of the joystick. Other than that, the controls were very good. The graphics are still pretty good when you consider how old the game is. The trees and coins do look a little weird, and I also don't know what some of the textures are supposed to be. The character models are also dated, but other than that, it looks good for a game this old. Most of the gameplay consists of getting through levels and collecting stars to open up new areas to collect more stars in. A lot of 3D platformers have you collect some sort of item, whether it's a star, a banana, a power cell, or keys. I think it's a solid gameplay loop for these kinds of games and helps you to feel rewarded for every level you beat or every challenge you complete. The music and sound design are great. There are some classic tracks that you have probably heard even if you haven't played the game. It's also cool that there's some voice acting in the game, which doesn't happen much in Mario games unless he's teaching you typing or playing Go Fish with you.
Do you have any bubbles?
Mario, go fish!
I'ma go fishing.
To be honest, I wanted to say this game is overrated now, but after playing it, it's a really solid game, especially for the time period. It lives up to its great reputation. I still think people saying it's the greatest game ever, or even the greatest 3D platformer, are over-exaggerating, but for what it is good. Let's move on to the other juggernaut platformer on the N64, Banjo-Kazooie. The story in Banjo-Kazooie is basically the same as Snow White. A witch sees that Banjo's sister is prettier than her and asks to put an end to that, so she kidnaps her. You have to adventure forth and save Banjo's sister. This game definitely has charm to it. The voices that the characters have while talking reminds me a bit of Undertale. I like the humor that the characters have, especially Kazooie. These kinds of things make the game have a soul. It doesn't just feel like something made in a corporate boardroom. The game controls well, and there are a lot of different moves that you get and learn, taking full advantage of the N64 controller. The gameplay is similar to Mario 64. You go around collecting a bunch of different things, maybe too many things. In the first level, it felt like every 20 seconds I was finding a new collectible. One thing that I didn't like is that some of these respawn if you leave the level or die, and you need to collect them again. Which I guess I can understand with the music notes since they're kind of like a high score for each level where you can collect up to 100 of them. Nevertheless, it was a little frustrating that I had to collect them multiple times because I died or left the area to get a puzzle piece I unlocked in an area outside the level. I did have some other frustrations while playing this game, but these are more for platforming games in general than this specific one. It can get frustrating when you keep missing a jump and have to go back and do it again and again. While playing these platformer games, there were times where I had to do things over and over again because I kept sliding off platforms or missing a jump. This game can get frustrating at times, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It helps you get better at the game, and it's nice that the game isn't super easy and presents a challenge to the player. This of course only really applies if the controls are good and the gameplay is fair, which in this game both of these are true. There's a trope called fake difficulty that this reminds me of. To quote TV tropes about fake difficulty, however, some games that should be relatively easy are actually quite hard. It could be due to shoddy programming, a game-breaking bug, poor implementation of gameplay elements, or time constraints. Or the developers threw in something which makes the game harder, but has nothing to do with the players or video game's AI skills. This is fake difficulty. In a lot of bad 3D platformers, these issues are present, especially things like bad controls or a bad camera. This can totally ruin a platforming game, but as long as the difficulty is fair, I think it is a good thing to have, as it helps you grow and learn as a player. When I'm playing games, it's nice to feel like I'm accomplishing things. When I'm finally able to collect all the puzzle pieces or music notes in a level, it gives me a strong feeling of accomplishment. Getting back to Banjo-Kazooie, I had a great time playing it. I would have loved this game as a kid. I had to force myself to stop playing so I could get back to writing this script. I can see why this game is so well regarded. As I previously mentioned, it has a strong charm to it, and it's just fun to play. Banjo-Kazooie and Mario 64 both get a lot of praise from gamers, but there's an N64 game that I feel often gets overlooked, which is Donkey Kong 64. A lot of people remember the DK rap, which is pretty awesome, but the game is fun too. I have a little nostalgia for this game as I played it at a friend's house as a kid. I think this game is very underrated. It controls well, and as you progress throughout the game, you unlock new characters and abilities to use. You also get to unlock guns to give those enemies some payback.
Wanders in, runs up to the fella with the gun, takes the gun and the bag of money off him. Everyone's like, yay, you know, we've been saved. Then the monkey starts backing out with the gun and the money.
Shut up! Sit down and
I'm not having this. And it does a runner with the money and the gun. No one's seen it since.
It's nice to be able to have ranged weapons. I mean, why doesn't Mario 64 have guns? Oh, that's why. The gameplay is similar to the other two games, but one thing that's cool is you get to unlock different characters as you progress throughout the game, who all have different abilities. I mean, you get to play as Diddy Kong and dual-wield peanut shooting guns and play an electric guitar. Who wouldn't want that? The music and graphics are pretty good. The fact that you keep unlocking new things and characters throughout the game makes it feel fresh all throughout. This game also has charm to it. I mean, it opens up to a rap song about the DK crew. Speaking of the crew and other characters, I like how unique each character is and that each has their own personality. The game also has a lot of collectibles like Banjo-Kazooie, which can be a good thing or bad thing depending on your preference. I think it's a good thing for this type of game. In my opinion, if you keep a platforming game very generic and bare bones, it gets boring after a while. There were some issues I had with the game. I felt like the controls were a little slippery. Whenever I needed to traverse a narrow platform, I'd fall off a lot. But other than that, I really enjoyed the game. I wanted to keep coming back to it just to play it some more. I think this game is definitely underrated among the N64 games. I've heard many people say that Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie are the best 3D platformers, and there haven't been many great ones since.
What?
I have to highly disagree with this. That's like saying, man, Wolfenstein 3D and Doom were the peak of first-person shooters. There haven't been any good ones since. Those are all good games, but they were just the beginning. We've gotten better since then. I mean, if Mario 64 is so good, where's Mario 65? All of these people are forgetting one major detail, one crucial detail. The true champion of the 5th generation of consoles, the competition that Nintendo themselves helped create. Side note, I love the PlayStation 2 and GameCube startups, but the PlayStation 1 startup is so epic, it might be my favorite. Anyways, Sony tried to make a CD-based peripheral with Nintendo for the SNES, but it failed. That was later turned into the PlayStation. Sony came in like a meteor and destroyed Nintendo. The PlayStation sold more than 3 times as many consoles as the N64. With it, we got some great 3D platformers that are just as quality as the N64 juggernauts. Let's start with everyone's favorite Eastern Barred Bandicoot, Crash Bandicoot. Before making this, Naughty Dog made this game. I did not have the original game as a kid, but I did have Crash Bash, and I still do have that game. Crash Bandicoot is a mix of 2D and 3D platforming. It feels like a real successor of older 2D platformers. You go through different levels on a map and make it to the end of the level, kind of like Super Mario 3. Sounds simple, but this game can get very frustrating. You can tell by how many times I die. This game can get challenging at times, and I didn't even get to the harder levels. Most games, when you beat a level, the characters do a dance or give a thumbs up or a peace sign. When you beat a level in Crash Bandicoot, sometimes Crash does those things, but sometimes he just gives a sigh of relief. Then the game tells you how many boxes you missed just to make you feel bad. One thing I like about this game is there's a good variety to the level design. There's 3D levels in different perspectives and 2D levels. There's one level where the camera faces towards you and you have to run after boulders. That level got pretty frustrating for me because I kept dying right before the checkpoint. But as I stated earlier, each time you die makes you learn and get better at the game. I think the difficulty is very balanced. It's not a cakewalk, but it's also not the hardest game ever. The game is very well made and is fun to play. It also controls well. I also really like the music and sound effects. The sounds that Crash makes are iconic. I also like the small details in the game, like Crash has different death animations for different things that happen to him. For example, if he gets burned, he turns to ashes. He can also get flattened by things, and he can explode into tiny pieces. Small details like those really help make this game a standout and a solid 3D platformer. A few complaints that I have is I wish there were more save points. I kept dying at the bonus levels, so I missed many opportunities to save. Also, I wish Crash had more attacks. His spin attack got me killed sometimes because I had to get too close to enemies. But other than those two complaints, I really liked the game, even if it was frustrating at times. Next, let's check out Spyro the Dragon. I remember renting a Spyro game as a kid. I think it was Spyro Year of the Dragon, because I remember there being skateboarding in the game. Let's take a look at the first Spyro game, made by Insomniac Games, who most recently made Spider-Man 2. This game is really good. I like the humor that Spyro and other characters have. Spyro is a fun character. His character model and the graphics in general look pretty good for a PS1 game, almost looking like a PS2 game. The controls are also really solid in this game. I like that you have a variety of attacks, including a charge and fire breath attack. You can also jump and glide around, which is always fun in games. One cool thing that this and some of the other games have is there's no HUD. Your health is shown by a dragonfly that follows you throughout the game. It's a really neat idea. It kind of reminds me of Dead Space, how the health was on the back of your character. I also like the small details in the game, like you can set flowers on fire and they burn and turn black. The gameplay consists of you going around and freeing other dragons. You also traverse different areas, collect items, and fight enemies. It's simple, but very fun. I had a fun time playing it, even if I didn't play for long. I honestly don't have much to say about this game. It's just a really solid game. There's a reason the game has had a resurgence and has led to other series like the Skylander games. Let's move on to Ape Escape. A few years ago, I got a PS2 for nostalgia purposes and bought Ape Escape with it. I really enjoyed it, so I went back to it for this video to talk about it. In this game, you have to go and capture monkeys in different places and time periods. One thing that makes this game really unique is its controls. PS1 controllers didn't always have analog sticks, and when they did, this game took full advantage of it. The left stick moves, and the right stick uses things like your sword or net, and you use it in the direction you push the stick. The face buttons are used for items, and you jump with the R1 button. It's kind of a weird setup at first, but I think it works very well for this game. This game is pretty fun, and like some of the other games, you get new gadgets as you progress through the game to help you catch monkeys. The monkeys start out really easy to catch, but start to take some strategy as you go on to later levels. I think this is a very simple but fun game, kind of like Mario 64. I also don't have much to say about this one, but I really enjoyed it. This is another good 3D platformer. This genre is great. There are so many good games. It can't miss. Of course there were misses. I couldn't just look at good games, but I don't want to waste my time or yours by playing a bunch of mediocre ones. So let's skip all of those and go to an infamous game. Let's take a look at Bubsy 3D. I'll be honest, I only lasted about 30 minutes into the game before being done with it. It's not just a bad game, it's an annoying game. They gave Bubsy the most annoying voice ever.
Now, what would a platform game be without platforms? I wonder if there's any extra lives up there.
And he just says the most annoying things, from breaking the fourth wall to really lame cat puns. But I do have to admit that this game has some standout features, in that it really stands out how poorly those features are implemented. This game has awful controls. There were a lot of games during the PS1 era that had so-called tank controls. That means that left and right turn the character in that direction, and forward and backward move them in the direction that they are facing. It worked alright in games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, but it does not work in a platforming game. Another awful thing is the camera. Every time you jump, the camera moves up and looks at your head. It's disorienting and was a horrible design decision. The attacking is also terrible in this game. Your primary attack is jumping on top of enemies, but with the camera moving and the bad controls, it's hard to make your target. The other way you can attack is by shooting atoms, but the way shooting is implemented is baffling. In Donkey Kong 64, you collect ammo, then switch to your weapon and shoot, which makes sense. That's how a monkey would do it in real life too. But in this game, you hold the square button and walk up to an atom, then you can shoot the atom from where you are standing.
No. Don't like that.
Imagine if in Call of Duty you could only shoot a gun if you walked up to one that was on the ground and could only shoot from that spot. Who thought that was a good idea? Since you can only attack by those two means, you can easily get overwhelmed by enemies. Just in the second level, there's tons of enemies and they can shoot. So a lot of times you'll miss jumping on an enemy and then get hit by one of them and then get hit by their friends, which gets very frustrating after a while. In many of the other games I covered, you had multiple attacks, including a standard attack, attacking while moving, dash attacks, ranged attacks, etc. In this game, you don't even want to bother with the enemies because the controls are so bad. The graphics are also pretty bad. It looks like this was one of the first 3D games ever made. The environments look like the developers forgot to download Counter-Strike Source. This looks like they used prototype graphics for the landscape and ran out of time, so they just released the game unfinished. Also, they just threw in floating gray platforms. The other games I talked about used the environment to make platforms or made unique looking platforms. This is just lazy and bad level building. I didn't even bother beating the second level of this game. It's not the worst game ever, but it's pretty bad. As I mentioned before, this game is infamous and has been on many worst games of all time lists. I think I would have had a much worse time if I had played more of the game, especially after playing all the good 3D platformer games. So those are some of the great and bad games of what many would consider to be the golden age of 3D platformers. But let's be real, this was just the beginning. There were 3D consoles before, but they didn't produce any notable 3D platformers like these. These were basically the prototypes, the first of their kind. They still had room to grow and become better. So many people only focus on these early games and forget all about what came next. So let's talk about what came next. Let's go from the golden age to what I would consider to be the platinum age. I'm only going to talk about one console. It's the only one I need to. The PlayStation 2 was one of the best consoles of all time and one of the best selling. This system brought us the evolution of 3D platformers, the next generation of them.
Yes. It's a lot like Star Trek, The Next Generation. In many ways, it's superior, but will never be as recognized as the original.
This is where I have the most nostalgia for 3D platformers, especially the Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper games. I had all 3 games of each series when I was a kid and beat all of them except for the first Jak and Daxter game. Let's start with Jak and Daxter. Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, is what happens when you take a great developer like Naughty Dog and have them make a game that progresses 3D platformers. The game is a certified classic. It's all great from the menu music to the gameplay. It has a great variety of areas and places. Sure, it has your basic areas like snow levels, but it's much more than that. One thing that's cool is that there isn't a big overworld like in Mario 64. Everything is interconnected, so you don't just go through a door or painting to get to a new area. The controls are great and intuitive, and you have a variety of moves and attacks. I also enjoy the characters a lot. Daxter is kind of a comedic relief character, and Jak doesn't really talk in this game. You also meet a lot of interesting characters along the way. It's just a really fun game. This is what a great classic 3D platformer looks like. Like, how could they even top this? Oh, that's how. Some combinations work well, like garlic and bread, or burgers and fries. Some combinations are not very good, like YouTubers and Apologies, or Disney and Star Wars. So what happens when you combine Jak and Daxter and Grand Theft Auto? You get something truly special. This is probably one of my favorite game sequels of all time. In this game, Jak and Daxter go to the future, and Jak gets dark powers and starts talking. You also get an arsenal of weapons, can drive and steal vehicles, and can attack random people and run from the police. It really is like a mashup of Jak and Daxter and GTA. You get a minimap that has your missions on it, and you can play them in what order you want to. The collectibles are now more of a way to unlock bonuses and extras rather than a necessity. This game has a lot of variety to it. There's missions where you control mechs, ones where you use hoverboards, ones where you race hover vehicles, and many more. It's such a good game. I know I praised Mario 64 earlier, but I gotta be honest, it's overrated. Like, people say it's the greatest game ever made, the end. In my opinion, Jak 2 is a better overall game. There's more variety, it's more fun, there's actual characters and story, and you can attack the innocent. I know some of you are saying, what? You think Jak 2 is better than Mario 64?
I do. And I'm tired of pretending it's not.
Mario 64 is a good game, but it's not as good as all of you are making it out to be. Moving away from that, it's just a really good game. It can be frustrating at times, but it's a solid game. So how did Jak 3 wrap up the trilogy? Pretty well actually. I like Jak 2 better, but this game is great. You get access to tons of new weapons, cars, and light and dark powers. You even get the ability to fly, shoot anti-gravity guns, and shoot mini nukes. The story continues from Jak 2 and introduces new areas and new characters. They upped a lot of things in this game, and it's a great and satisfying end to the trilogy of games. Let's move on to Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper is a stealth action adventure 3D platformer. The combination works really well. The first game is a more simplistic style of game, but is a lot of fun. The variety in levels and gameplay is great. As you progress, you learn new thief moves that make the game even more fun. Same as Jak 2, Sly 2 is my favorite Sly Cooper game, and is also one of my favorite sequels, and is also better than Mario 64. Sly 2 just made everything better. You now have a health bar instead of a weird Lucky Charm system, and you can also play as Bentley and Murray, Sly's friends. Each one is unique, like Murray is really strong, and Bentley has cool tools like a crossbow that can shoot sleeping darts at enemies. The music, sound effects, and voice acting are all great. You also get to do more thief activities like pickpocketing, taking reconnaissance photos, and stealing valuable items. This game also gives you a minimap and missions similar to Jak 2, but each episode is in a new location, from France to a giant airship. When I was a kid, I'd have fun just running around the world and messing around with guards. There's not much more I can say about Sly 2, it's just such a good game. It's the kind of sequel that all sequels should try to be. Sly 3 was also a great sequel and added a lot of cool things to the mix, even a multiplayer mode, which I played with my friends as a kid. It had such a great variety to the game. One minute you're in a lemonade drinking contest in Australia, and the next you're looking for buried treasure as a pirate. This game even had 3D in it and came with 3D glasses. It was another great end to a trilogy of games. How come back then developers could make so many great sequels with so many new and innovative ideas in each one, while now we wait 11 years for Skull and Bones? It's probably because the ones in charge actually loved gaming, and we're not just some corporate hacks. The last big 3D platformer series I want to talk about is Ratchet and Clank. I didn't own these games as a kid, but when I got older, I got All for One, Tools of Destruction, and the HD trilogy. I've only played the first game in the HD trilogy. Ratchet and Clank is another great game. It has great humor in it and even made me laugh at times. It also has a lot of cool and unique weapons and other things to unlock. I like Ratchet and Clank's dynamic, and the other characters are a lot of fun as well. It's a solid game, I just haven't played much of it. Another series I want to quickly mention are the LEGO games, mainly LEGO Star Wars and LEGO Indiana Jones. These games were a lot of fun to play, and what was more fun is that they were co-op, so I could play them with my family. They're very humorous and follow the movies well. It's also cool that you get to play as a large variety of characters, from heroes to villains. There are some other classic PS2 platformer games like Psychonauts, which I recently bought on sale on Steam, but haven't had the time to play yet. Before moving on to modern 3D platformers and determining if 3D platformer games should come back, I want to talk to you about a conspiracy about platforming games, something that I haven't heard anyone else talk about. It has to do with racing games. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out. I have noticed a huge pattern of platformers becoming racing games, and I can prove it's not a coincidence. Looking at a research paper by Ned Koch and Augustine Tarkham from Texas A&M International University, they state in the abstract, "Let us say that a coincidence involving two events where one seems to predict the other happens a number of times. How many times until it can be considered not only a coincidence, but a statistically significant pattern? We propose a framework to answer this question. Using the framework, we find the number of times required is 7. So if I can give at least 7 examples of platforming games, 2D or 3D, coming out with a kart racing game, then it's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. So without doing deep research, here's some of the examples I found. Of course, Mario and Sonic have multiple racing games, so there's 2 examples. Crash Bandicoot also has multiple racing games, so that's 3. On the N64, we got Diddy Kong Racing, so that's 4. We got Mythmaker's Superkart GP, based on Data Design's Trixie and Toyland Mythmakers game. Hey, they don't have to be good games to count. So that's 5. Then we got Jak X, which is a racing game in the Jak and Daxter world, so that's 6. Then we have Little Big Planet Karting, which makes 7. For a bonus, we have Skylanders Superchargers Racing, which makes 8 examples. This proves that it's not a coincidence. I don't know what it means, but why do so many platformers have kart racing games in their series? A lot of these are great games, especially the Mario Kart series, but I just think it's so weird that we have so many of these platformers that have a kart racing game or multiple of them in their series. It's like you either die a platformer or live long enough to see yourself become a kart racer. I know this isn't the craziest thing to point out, but I just thought it was interesting and wanted to share it, since I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. Let's move on to modern day 3D platformers. I mentioned before that we still get tons of 2D platformers, but 3D platformers are pretty scarce nowadays. Let's take a look at a few examples of modern 3D platformers. I haven't played any of these personally, so I'm just going off of how they were received, which I think is more important in this instance anyways. Yooka-Laylee was made by some of the same people who made Banjo-Kazooie. It started out as a Kickstarter and made over £2 million from over 73,000 backers with a goal of £175,000. It was very successful and people were really excited for this game, but when it came out, it was met with mixed reviews. Some loved it and others thought it was just okay, not living up to their expectations. A Hat in Time is a game that has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. I personally don't know all that much about it, but from what others say, it's a fun game that has great controls and is very customizable. This seems to be one of the few modern 3D platformer games that has widespread acclaim. Balan Wonderland is what happens when you make a game that is both too simple and too complex. Many praise the visuals, but the gameplay is where it lacks the most. You have to go around collecting costumes to do different moves, but you only get one button to do things. So some costumes you can't even jump in. I mean, look at this control list. This is horrible. They should have made it so that you get a basic jump and attack, and costumes may give you a special ability, attack, or modify your jump, kind of like how the Mario games do it. There's also a lot of dumb costumes like Box Fox, who randomly turns into a box which slides around and you can't control it, and will most likely just send you off a cliff. It's kind of impressive how poorly designed the game is. If you want to learn more about it, there's a great video by Rerez that you can check out after this video. Knack is a game that got pretty mid-reviews. It was supposed to be this big PS4 exclusive, but not many people cared for it. It's basically just a meme at this point. Psychonauts 2 came out not too long ago and got a lot of praise, showing that bringing back an old series can work in the modern day. Some of the platformers I mentioned earlier haven't really gone away, which is why I haven't included them in the thumbnail of this video. We've gotten recent Spyro, Crash, and Ratchet and Clank games. Those series seem to still be doing well, which is good to see. Lastly, I need to mention the modern Sonic and Mario games. 3D platformer Mario games seem to always get praise, and there's been a good amount of them on the Switch. Nintendo even made a collection of them with Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, and Mario Galaxy, but they messed it up by not including Mario Galaxy 2 and by making it a limited time release. Nice going, Nintendo. The Sonic games are a mixed bag. Sonic Frontiers was pretty well received for the most part. I haven't played it, but I really liked the music from it. It brought me back to when I listened to Sleeping with Sirens in high school. On the other hand, a lot of people didn't like Sonic Forces or Sonic Boom. The most recent Sonic game I played was Sonic and the Secret Rings on the Wii. I don't know how well it holds up now, but I enjoyed it when I was younger. The reception of modern day platformers seems to be mixed. There are some great ones, some mid ones, and some bad ones. Looking back at the older platformers of the N64, PS1, and PS2 generations, they still hold up. Even ones I had no nostalgia for were fun to pick up and play. I like how these games are simple to play but are also challenging. I also think these type of games are great for players of all ages. Younger kids can get into these games and have a lot of fun with them. Teens and adults can also play them and appreciate them. Do I think series like Sly Cooper, Banjo-Kazooie, or Jak and Daxter should be brought back? Maybe. While I would love to see these games return and be great like some others that have continued to thrive, I'm not sure how great they would be. I don't think the original studios or developers would work on them, and I don't want to see beloved IPs be mistreated, as we've seen many examples of. Sometimes it's better to leave those things in the past. I would love to see them make a comeback, only if they could match the quality of the old games. I would, however, love to see a resurgence of new and exciting 3D platformers. I think it can work well like a Hat in Time. One problem I think developers make when making new 3D platformers is they go back to the roots of the N64 and PS1 days. I think that's a mistake. Those games had a lot of stuff in them, but at their core, they were more basic. I think it would be better to look at the innovation era during the PS2 days and make a platformer that changes things up and does its own thing. I think it's fine to make a tribute game to the earlier era, like how developers make games in a PS1 horror aesthetic, but I think if developers want to make a new IP, they should try to innovate and make something new. 3D platformers should make a comeback. They're still very popular. It's such a fun genre of games that can be played and enjoyed by anyone. It's a niche that's waiting to be filled, especially by indie devs. We've gotten a million 2D platformers, Metroidvanias, and boomer shooters. 3D platformers are ripe for indie devs and larger devs to use. You just need to do it right. Don't try to be like Balan Wonderland. Be like Psychonauts 2 or A Hat in Time. Gamers are hungry for fun and innovative games right now. They're tired of the same old soulless, boring games. We've seen so many small games blow up and become huge, while big games have flopped and led to studios closing. In conclusion, let's bring back fun. Let's bring back innovation. Let's bring back 3D platformers. What are some of your favorite 3D platformer games? Do you think this genre should make a comeback? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for destroying our 100 sub goal. If you like this video, please subscribe and leave a like. Let's try to get to 500 subscribers. If you want to see more videos like this, check out the recommended video or go to my channel. Thanks for watching and for your support of the channel.